Good evening and warm welcome to all the participants. We are about to kickstart the 181st WiseViews Leadership Conversation. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Malavika Harita. Ma'am, good evening and welcome to this conversation. I'll do a brief introduction as usual and then hand it over for your opening remarks, ma'am. Please allow me to share my screen. These are WiseViews Leadership Conversations, which we hold every Friday, like this one, and we have reached session number 181 now. We are joined by one of my favorites in the space of brand and communication, Ms. Malavika Harita. She's going to talk about, do you communicate like a leader? And let's see what we have in store for us. So this introduction and opening remarks will be for about 25 minutes or so, and then another 40 minutes of Q&A that we have for this session. Let me take this opportunity to introduce Ms. Malavika Harita. She is quite passionate about mentoring startups and women entrepreneurs. She is a communication evangelist, brand strategist, teacher, and corporate trainer. She founded Brand Circle in the year 2018, which is a consultancy firm working in the areas of communication and corporate training. She is a resident mentor at N.S. Raghavan Center for Entrepreneurship and Learning of IIM Bangalore. She has 41 years of experience in marketing, communication, and entrepreneurship. Brand consultancy and strategic planning are her focus areas. She is actively involved in mentoring startups in the profit and non-profit sectors at the NSR cell and other incubators across the country. She is on the board of governors of the IIMs Bangalore and Visakhapatnam and on the governing council of Mount Carmel College. She is the chairperson of the Big Bang Awards Committee and the treasurer of the Advertising Club, Bangalore. Ms. Malavika has been teaching for the last 30 years at various PG institutes in India and abroad. She is also very involved in executive education and training and runs various workshops and programs for practicing managers. In her earlier avatar, she founded and ran Saatchi & Saatchi Focus in India as CEO for 25 years. She was one of the first Gurukul Shivaning scholars selected by the British government for a special program at the London School of Economics. She is the first woman to win the Distinguished Alumni Award from IIM Bangalore, the first woman to deliver the Founders Day lecture at IIM Bangalore, the first woman president of the IMB Alumni Association, and the first woman alumnus to serve on the IMB board in the 50 years of its existence. And she is also a TEDx speaker. I'm enjoying while reading this. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, ma'am. That's music to ears of anybody who is connected to IIM Bangalore. Once again, welcome, ma'am. I'll also introduce my colleague. I'll take one more minute. Dr. R. Prasad is a senior director at Academic Wing in ICFAI Group. He brings 3 decades of rich experience as an entrepreneur, as an academic, and as a corporate professional as well. He holds BTech from IIT Bombay and PGDM from IIM Kolkata. IIM Kolkata is also a prestigious institution. Welcome, Professor Prasad. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I thought I should not just be happy about IIM Bangalore and leave IIM Kolkata just like that.
Correct. They started long before we did, right, Prasad?
Yes.
One of the oldest.
So, ma'am, I request now to start the opening remarks with your presentation. You can also share your screen,
Okay.
and we are all ears to your wonderful topic that you have chosen. Do you communicate like a leader? That's very interesting, and we want you to help us understanding that. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you, Sudhakar and Dr. Prasad and ICFAI for inviting me today. I am, as I get older, I've realized that communication is one of the most critical disciplines and one of the most critical things that every manager should learn and should practice. So I term myself a communication evangelist, and I'm trying to help people across all age groups to be able to communicate better. That's what I'm going to share with you today. A few of my thoughts. And one of the things I do not believe in is talking, or giving gyan, as it's called. Everything that I'm presenting to you in the next 15, 20 minutes are things that I actually practice during my career and now, of course, in my teaching and mentoring profession. So let me share my screen and we'll take it from there. So when Ms. Sudhakar asked me to speak about do you communicate like a leader, I thought I should talk a little bit about leadership and what it entails and how communication fits into the whole story. Because we think once you become a leader, you can communicate automatically. Most of us are not natural born communicators, and there is no harm in saying that. But what I would like all of you to think about is all of us can learn to be communicators, right? And that's in our hands. And the only thing that works is a lot of practice, a lot of structuring. And I'll just take you through a few steps that very easy to follow, but you need to work on it. It doesn't happen naturally for all of us. In fact, I am very much against what I call smart communicators who talk a lot and say nothing. My advice to all the young managers in this group, be effective communicators who say something. When they communicate, they actually convey a clear message. Based on my 40 odd years of leading teams and organizations, I just put together a few thoughts on what it is and what it takes to be a leader. Right? Now, this has got nothing to do with gender. This is gender. And at my age, I am gender agnostic. And I think men have equal vulnerabilities as to women. But I think if you are a true leader and you want to be a true leader, it's not just about being human and humane. You also need to learn to be tough. You need to be very honest, disciplined, knowledgeable, and not frightened. One of the crises I'm seeing in corporate India today, and I think Sudhakar and Prasad will agree with me, is the fact that people are frightened of saying no. People are wanting to be popular. With the result, there's a whole dilution of standards across corporate India. And I find that quite worrying because as a leader, you have to take the tough calls. You have to say no. And if you're fair about it, there is no reason why you can't continue to be respected, right? I also believe that you need a 200% commitment to whatever you believe in and whatever you do. And this is the credo that I have followed through these years. It goes without saying that leaders need to know how to communicate. In fact, as Hume said, the art of communication is the language of leadership. And all of you, whether you're leaders today or you're going to be potential leaders, please pay attention to your communication style and learn how to communicate. Now, as I mentioned earlier, all of us are not natural born communicators, but it is very easy. It's not very easy, but it's a learned skill. And I'll give you a few tips and tricks as we go along on how you can do that. Now, one of the problems with us is we talk a lot. We also don't listen enough. 50% of communication is listening. And unless you listen, you cannot be either an effective manager or an effective leader. So let me give you a model that we use in communication. This is called the Hurrier model of effective listening. And it has several components. So there is the hearing, which is the physical aspect of listening. It is the understanding, it's the remembering, it is interpreting in your context, it's evaluating, and then responding. And this is something I find across our country. We answer questions before they're asked, right? So my advice to everybody, take that I'm not asking you to hang on for 2 minutes, but I'm saying take that 15, 20, or 30 seconds to assimilate so that you can answer meaningfully. So I believe that hearing and listening is as important as speaking. Now, there's another aspect. I've got a small little video which I'm going to play about decoding body language. All right, so let's watch. Please tell me if you can. Yeah. it is such a simple idea. And that's why I put up this video for you. We only listen and hear the words, but 93%, and this is a research fact, has already been communicated through body language. So one of the things as good leaders and good managers is to understand and be able to decode body language. There are some very interesting videos by the head of the FBI in the US, which I think you should watch. He talks about how to decode this whole thing. Very interesting, because FBI agents are trained to understand body language. So let me come to a few rules that I'd like you to think about. One is, do you communicate with ROI? And when I say ROI, I'm not talking about return on investment. I'm talking about relevance, originality, and impact, and a return of investment on your time and energy. Because if you want to be a good communicator, you need to spend that time and energy on your communication. So let me look at relevance. Relevance to the audience. Originality to differentiate you from everyone else, and especially in today's over-communicated world, and ChatGPT, everything looks alike. And finally, the impact to get the audience to behave the way you want them to. People are now asking, and if you compare yourself with previous generations, you will get what I'm trying to say. People are always asking, what's in it for me? Why should I listen to you? What am I going to learn from the next 20 minutes of listening to you, right? And why should I believe you? Do you have the credibility as a source, as a speaker, so that I believe you? So these two things are the two pillars of communication. WIIFM, what's in it for me, and RTB, which is a reason to believe, right? And this is something I want all of you to think about. So whether it is your presentation or a post, anything at all, or a mail, please answer these two questions. I also want you to think about good old Aristotle. I know he was many, many years ago, but he said something which was very interesting, that communication is a combination of pathos, which is emotion, and logos, which is logic, right? So logic, all of us get. Most of us are very logical, and Indians are more logical than the others. Pathos is the emotion which a few of us are comfortable with, a lot of us aren't. But it is like a formula, the pathos and the logos. Depending on whom you are speaking to, you use a certain proportion of pathos versus logos. Most importantly, this is based on a foundation of your credibility or ethos. So the three pillars, according to Aristotle, and they still hold true, believe me, are what you need to keep thinking about. Please also understand that you can't have one single communication strategy. It depends on different people. Different people require different strategies. Different timings require different strategies. People in different positions require you to speak differently. So you can't really have one size fits all. You need to have, say, from XXS to 4XL, right? You need to have the whole gamut of sizes and shapes to be able to communicate effectively. I want to bring you to another concept, and this is something we miss out on, especially when I work with all my startups. They want to say everything in one post. Please remove everything else. Just say one thing strongly. And I just want you to jot down something I'm going to tell you now, which is the less you say, the more you communicate. And the more you say, the less you communicate. Right? Now, this is one of the hardest things I'm asking you to do. I'm saying edit. Just come straight to the point. All of us love to talk, and we talk about things which are not necessarily relevant to what we are saying, but we love hearing our own voices. And this is something I want you to keep in mind, the single-minded proposition. Be single-minded in your communication, because in today's world, attention spans are becoming 5 seconds. Use the traffic light test. A very interesting idea that you park next to another car or bike at a traffic light, and you've got 5 seconds exactly to say what you want to say. What are you going to tell them? What are you going to tell them about yourself. You just have exactly 5 seconds to say what you want to say. And that is typically the attention spans of today. They're saying that human attention spans are 5 to 8 seconds, and it's getting shorter and shorter. So I'm just going to give you a few rules. Again, tried and practiced by me. I hope you'll find them useful. The first is seen, and everything I'm going to say, and this is something people tell me about, that my presentations are very simple. They are. I make them deliberately simple, but try and apply them and you'll find out how difficult it is, right? So I deliberately keep my presentations very simple so that they make sense to everybody. First principle is the KISS principle. I have, it used to be keep it short, stupid. I've changed it. I'm politically correct. And I call it keep it short and simple, right? First principle. Rule number 2, remember that your audience doesn't care about what you're saying, probably doesn't even want to know what you're saying. So it's up to you to keep it logical and, in fact, hold their finger and lead them through the presentation. When we present, please remember you're not presenting to you. It's absolutely clear to you what you're going to say, but it's not so clear to your audience what you want to say. So please keep it absolutely logical. I use the structure normally. It's called the Minto pyramid. And this is how you actually structure your presentation, your main points, your sub-points, and your support points. The other thing I want you to remember is we love the be nice and the good to have. We forget the must-haves. So whenever you're writing or presenting, whatever it is, the must-have must be there. If you have time, you can have the second row, which is the good to have. The nice to have, you can eliminate. In fact, in today's world, I think the last two categories can be eliminated completely. Just have the must-haves, because normally we forget the important points. We're so busy talking about all the nice, cute things. We forget that that's not the main message. Please know your audience. Take the trouble whenever, especially when you have a large presentation or you're writing to a group or whatever, please understand your audience, know them, and tailor your message for them. The message is not for you again, I repeat, it is for your audience. Use this model, very interesting. It says audience, you define them. What is the intent of making this presentation? And what is the message you want to convey? So everything you do, anytime you present, and it works from an email to a post, to a love letter, to whatever you want to use to communicate with, the M model works. My next rule, I mentioned this already, you have to answer WIIFT. What's in it for them? And this is the benefit for your audience. It could be a customer, it could be an audience, whatever. It could be a class, any. It's nice to talk a lot, right? But you need to trigger action, especially in the business scenario. It's nice to have a presentation, but there has to be what is called a CTA, or a call to action. Have a plan on how you propose to use this to trigger action. Which brings me to something that I'm very passionate about. I talk about this a lot. At the risk of sounding boring, I'm going to repeat it just now, which is the power of P cubed. And I'm talking about passion, which a lot of us should have. But I believe that if you have the passion without a purpose and a plan, you will begin to sound like Miss World, who every year removes world poverty and prevents wars. And every year we have a war and a famine, right? So I don't want you to be a Miss World. Please be very clear that passion without a purpose and plan is completely meaningless. And you will become one of those glib talkers who says a lot but says nothing. A lot of us are very nervous, right? And that's perfectly okay. In fact, I believe that if you're a little nervous before a presentation, you actually do much better than if you think you can just crack it, right? So if you do feel nervous, and I have a lot of my students and mentees who get paralyzed, especially talking to a large audience, just relax, take a breath. I'm smiling at Sudhakar. Make eye contact with the people in the audience. And for heaven's sake, don't read from your slides. This is one of the mistakes we make. You're supposed to be having a conversation. So if you look at the way I'm presenting now, I'm actually not reading from my slides. I'm just speaking to all of you. I can't see you, but I'm looking at my camera and I'm speaking to it. I'm not rushing. Don't rush. And this is another habit we have. We start very slow and then we rush through the presentation. Never do that. You're not catching a bus. But don't go to sleep either. Some people speak so slowly, they put you to sleep. Let your passion come through. And as Steve Jobs said, enjoy the process, right? If you don't enjoy your own presentation, how do you expect your audience to listen to you? They'll fall asleep. Your body language, I cannot emphasize how important this is. And I would like all of you to study your personality type. Now, everybody is not an alpha personality, right? And that's perfectly okay. You can be a beta, theta, gamma, whatever it is you are. Don't try to be something you're not, but use it to your advantage. Use your hands, move them purposefully. I don't know what happens when we have presentation. Our hands just dangle. It's quite okay, normal conversation. But when we make a presentation, we quite don't know what to do with the hands. So move them purposefully and use them to make a point, but don't wave them around like that. Use it meaningfully. Please prepare. There is no royal road to learning. Whatever people tell you, this is something ChatGPT cannot teach you. This is something you need to learn. And a small trick, whenever you have a large presentation, take your phone, flip it, keep it in front of you with a light on your face, talk to the phone, record yourself, play it back, and self-correct. The only way you will actually improve your presentation skills, I mean, we can tell you what is wrong with you with your presentation, but it's only if you see yourself that you're able to self-correct. Self-correction is the best way to become a good presenter. I'm going to share with you a framework which I've developed over the years. It's called the Communication Effectiveness Framework. I call it the CEF framework for short. And whenever you make a presentation, small or big, please assess yourself against this framework. And I don't want you to ask others to assess you. If you recorded yourself, and even if you haven't, you know in your heart exactly how you present it. Yeah. Don't kill your gut feel. So were you clear? Were you concise? Was it complete? Were you credible? Right? And did your communication deliver ROI? Relevance, originality, and impact. Good leaders and good managers like yourselves need to understand people. And this is something we forget. Communication and consumer behavior, buyer behavior, are linked very, very closely together. And if you don't understand people, you cannot communicate with them, right? So I'm a consumer behaviorist by profession. And one of the things I have learned and taught myself is how do I gauge people? How do I understand people better so that I can communicate with them both as a leader and as a communicator or as a teacher? So to do this, I want you to like people. Now, if you don't like people, it shows in your body language very clearly that you can't stand the other person. So you need to like people, you need to understand them. You must learn how to communicate with them, and then you must communicate with them. It's not enough to say, I'm a good communicator if you don't communicate, because people don't have the time or energy to read your mind. You need to communicate with them. And through this process, you're able to manage them. So I want you all to redefine yourself, not just as leaders or managers, but as sutradharas or storytellers. I want you to see yourself as charioteers, because leaders actually are driving a chariot with people running in with your team running in every direction. It's up to you to bring them, give them focus. And finally, see yourself as a prism, especially if you're working in the corporate sector, as a prism of the corporate values. And if you're an entrepreneur, a prism for your entrepreneurial values, because that is how you build organizations. Right. So my good wishes and blessings to all of you. I'd like to wish you all the best, and may the force be with you. I'm a great Trekkie fan. Star Wars and Star Trek are my absolute favorites. I watched them infinite number of times. So may the force be with you. And this is in case any of you want to connect with me. Here are my social media tags. I'm fairly active on social media. Be happy to connect with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I think I jotted down breezily on all the points that you have mentioned, with a little bit of fear that the last slide will be a quiz. So that sums up the most effective PPT that we have come across in the recent times that you have presented. Wonderful. These slides tell a bigger tale. Everything is acronymized, but then it packs in those frameworks and easy to remember. The hooks that you left in our mind in a short span of say 20 minutes that you had to speak about is going to be staying with us for a longer time, I guess.
Thank you.
And like the way I have enjoyed, I'm sure people around the screen also have enjoyed. And before we jump in, from so many points that we have jotted down, questions also arise. And I'm sure others have jotted down. They also would have lots of questions. So before we get into the Q&A, I want to compliment the large number of people who have joined today around the screen. We have people from tech. There are techies, there are media professionals, there are finance professionals, there are educators, there are people coming from UK, Australia. I mean, it's an odd time in Australia, but most welcome. And many others from India. People from law have joined. People from finance, people, entrepreneurs, and social work also have joined. I welcome all of them once again for this wonderful conversation to begin now. Ma'am, armed with so many frameworks that you have given, this looks like we are going to have a longer Q&A session. I request you to help us by staying maybe 10 minutes more than the stipulated time.
No problem at all. I'm all yours.
Fantastic, ma'am. Professor Prasad, I request you to start the cluster number 1, and I'll come back for cluster number 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rao. Thank you, ma'am, for simplifying the theme for the audience and for all those who will listen later. My first question is related to the various groups. Many of them find communication to be tough, and which is the reason why the session should be popular. So walking the path also means that you have to start in a focused way and you have to build on it. So taking everything at a time may be difficult. So the first question for such an audience is, how would you distinguish between leadership communication and other types of communication? I mean, to begin their orientation and capacity development, how do you distinguish and then apply this in a certain area of practice?
See, one of the things, Dr. Prasad, and that's what I find a little amusing, the principles of communication, right? And I've been at this for a very long time. The principles of communication are exactly the same. So whether I'm doing a marketing campaign, whether I'm a leader speaking to my team, whether I'm talking to my peers, whatever it is, right? The principles of communication do not change. So what I've tried to do in this very short presentation is actually distill that, right? Distill that into some frameworks that can be used. So the principles don't change. What does change is the language, right? The terminologies. For example, if you're in the B2B space, the way you would speak would be different from if you were talking about soap and powder in the B2C space, or whether you were talking in the B2E space, which is business to employees. You mentioned that there were lawyers in the audience, the way you would speak in a court. So the principles don't change. You still have to understand your audience, the intent, the message, the AIM model I talked about. You have to answer WIIFT, right? You have to have the credibility so that people listen to you. And you need to ensure that you take them through the presentation. The principles don't change. It's perhaps the jargon, the language, the tone that may change. So it's a misnomer when you say that it's different. Not at all. If you remember these principles, the WIFM remains the same across.
Thank you, ma'am, for clarifying that. Now, when we come to the practice of communication, the principles being what you have mentioned, we often find that we do this well. We apply the principles well in certain buckets of time and certain situations, and not necessarily in many other situations. So if you look at it generically, they say there is a leader in everybody. Now, how do you spread this out so that it is there much more in all spaces of time in the practice than it is not?
Okay, so what you're saying is that how do we build this whole thing about leading or leadership, or is that what you're asking me?
The communication aspect of it.
Okay. So just like there aren't natural born communicators, right? All of us are not natural born communicators. A lot of us are not natural born leaders either. Okay. But this is a learned skill. And this is something you must be interested in doing. Now, you cannot be a communicator or a leader automatically. You need to put in that kind of effort. You need to have that intent. And it is not about rising to the top because of you've been in an organization, because of tenure. You rise to the top because you want to, you're ambitious. So there is a degree of ambition. You're able to communicate well. That's one of the prerequisites of good leaderships and good managers. And you need to, what I strongly believe in, and which has held me in good stead, is knowledge. I've always believed that people who really want to go up in life, who want to rise, who want to go up the leadership triangle, get up organizational hierarchies, need to have knowledge. It is my belief, knowledge is power. I am also a woman born 4 generations ago when there were no concessions given to women. But I have never felt the glass ceiling because I've always known more than anyone else in the room. And I took the trouble to build my knowledge base. So I think true leaders and people who really want to do well have to build this knowledge within themselves. So superficiality lasts only to a certain level. After that, the people who are truly knowledgeable and are able to communicate clearly are the ones who go up the ladder.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll come a bit more to the practice side now. And if we were to look at some use cases in the public domain, which you are free to discuss, and if you have to take, 1 or 2 such use cases on the gaps, because people would know about it, they would get to understand this, the practice of the principles in that. Can you look at 1 or 2 such use cases where there are these mistakes which are made, popular ones, and what then can be done about it?
Okay. So there, in today's world of social media, right, everything is magnified and amplified. So that is actually a problem for many leaders and communicators because everything you say gets amplified. For example, the recent case of that gentleman who heads L&T, I forget his name, L&T Mind, who spoke about not looking at
Subramaniam, I think.
Subramaniam, yeah, who spoke about not looking at your wife. Don't waste your time looking at your wife. Now, I think what he actually wanted to communicate wasn't incorrect in the sense he wanted to say, work hard. But the way he said it and the analogies he used became very, very offensive. Okay. So you need to be careful about the words that you use because a lot of what you say, especially as a leader, is kind of taken out of context and blown up. The other thing that happened was Mr. Narayan Murthy, who spoke a few years ago about working 70 hours a week, right? I think it's the tone which matters a lot, the tone of voice. He didn't really mean it in a wrong sense. And I think most of you in the audience do work 70 hours. I know I do. I work 18 hours a day, 6 days a week. So that's much more than 70. But I think it's the way you say it, Dr. Prasad, which makes all the difference. As you go up the leadership ladder, the other thing you need to be a little careful about is the words. The tone is one. The other thing is the actual words you use. You need to be a little politically correct the way you speak. Of course, if you are like Donald Trump, right, or like Elon Musk, who don't really care what people think of them, and I think they do it more for effect than anything else, right? They get away with saying whatever they want to say. But I don't think we want to be either Donald Trump or Elon Musk. I think we want to be who we are. And the tone, the language used, and the way you communicate are becoming very critical, especially because of the glare of social media.
Thank you, ma'am. I think you've given a very hands-on, popular example, which is getting discussed even today.
All over the
And,
place.
and there are people who are adding to the conversation by putting their share in.
Prasad, if I can just interrupt, there is one person who I admire very few people, okay? But this is one person whose communication I really admire, and that is Mr. Anand Mahindra, right? I like the way he dominates Twitter, right? He has a point of view and he kind of uses the medium so well, very polished and very urbane. I think that is a great example of a corporate leader who communicates powerfully, but is not a controversial person because his personality isn't like that. But Donald Trump, and this I'm going to say this openly, the guy is a great communicator, and he's a very negative brand, and I know everyone hates him. That's besides the point. But if you just look at him from a brand perspective, he knows exactly what media picks up, which is all his stupid controversial statements, right? And he plays that. He's nobody's fool. He knows exactly what he's doing. But media picks that up. So there is this nexus between media and popularity, and you need to figure out how you're going to use it. It could be negative, it could be positive. Sorry for that.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think what you're also highlighting is that you can get into a situation where you also look at the smart way. I think you're reflecting on Donald Trump as the wise way.
Yeah.
And you're talking about Anand Mahindra there. Thank you, ma'am. Here I'll get into a related situation. Now, leaders need to balance assertiveness, empathy based on the style and the situation that they find themselves in, and especially in high stakes situation. So could you look at some recent crises where this was called for, and how it was highlighted or how it could have been done better in your previous previous situation when you have illustrated, you've given both, where there were gaps as well as people are doing it well. So if you look at the sense of balance, and this I'm also connecting to my first question, that we pass through so many situations in a day, and then you have to switch, that switchability element between situations and this balancing. So could you kind of illuminate us on this with some use cases and the principles?
Okay. So again, I go back to my AIM model framework I gave you. Your audience changes, right? But the intent is what you want to say and how you're going to say it. So one of the things I have always practiced, and I'm going to give you personal examples of myself as a leader, the way I would speak to my boss,
Yes.
who was, I had an Australian boss for a very long time. He lived in Australia, but not even in India, was very different. Because the context, I had to give him a context to what was happening in the Indian market. So the way I spoke to my boss was very different from the way I used to speak to my peers in India, right? And I worked a global organization. And I realized that, your tone, the phrases that I used, right? The clarity of my conversation had to be maintained. There had to be a very clear agenda, which I had to follow. And because the person was not here, we were always online or on Zoom or whatever, you had to be clearer than normal. Whereas when I was speaking in an Indian context to my team here, I was able to take many shortcuts. And, with our Indian Jugadi spirit, we go all over the place. I was able to take many, many shortcuts. And there were a lot of instances and contexts that I did not have to provide because we all understood it. But having said that, in certain critical situations, for example, if we were downsizing, right? And I've gone through that many times, at least 4 times in my career, I've had to actually downsize because of international pressures. The way you hold that conversation is very, very different from, when you're telling people good news and giving them a promotion, right? That's a much easier conversation to have. And that's what, as leaders, we love to have. What we hate to have are those tough conversations when you're either sacking a person, you're not giving them an increment, or whatever, or even sacking a client sometimes, right? So you have to change your tone, and these are the most important things. You have to change your tone. And what I have found is to be absolutely honest. I think life is too short to keep telling lies. And unless you're really bright, if you tell one lie, you have to tell six more to cover it up. So I believe it's much easier not to lie. I always tell people the way it is. Right? Now, that doesn't make me very popular, but it definitely makes me respected, because people say that you see what you get. So that's something I'm learning, and I've learned over the years. Authenticity and honesty is actually what tides you over these very tough situations. Believe me, as leaders, you will go through these tough calls, and sometimes you have to say things that are not very pleasant. So how do you do that well, fairly? And that's what I said. You need to be human, and you need to be humane.
Thank you, ma'am. You have illustrated a number of points there. First is, I think, the need to be sensitive to the context.
Yeah.
And then
And not roll over, Dr. Prasad. See, you also have to be quite tough sometimes. And a no is a no. A no is not a maybe. So that is also something we learn. And especially as for the women in this audience, that's very difficult for a lot of women to say no. You have to learn to say no. It's a tough word, but I think it's a very effective word. And most of us don't say no. We say maybe. And culturally, I think various cultures, they don't say no at all. So that's something you have to learn to say. No is a no. It's not maybe.
excellent, ma'am. I think you have the two spectrums. While being sensitive, you need to be tough. At the same time, you need to use the tone and the language by which, while being honest about what you intend to say. We are at 7:17, so if time permits, I'll come back. Thank you, ma'am. Back to Professor Rao.
That was greedy, Dr. Prasad. He wanted to ask all questions himself. Okay, I will also not try to do the same. I'll ask just one question or 1.5 questions back, and then we'll leave the mics open for audience to actually ask directly. Let them communicate directly to you. So I request the members in the audience to raise their hands, then we'll open the mics for you. That is it. Of course, the first question was keyed in by Sujata Garu from London, from Wales actually. We'll open the mic for you after my question. Ma'am, one question is that constantly we are communicating. Organizations of all kinds, like political, social, business, and through their brands or through their decisions or through their behavior, we are always communicating. And there's nothing else but communication that's happening in this world through all the entities that we have. Therefore, majority of the times we see that we are driven by impulse. Unless you are structured, unless someone follows your presentation and practices, and it is ingrained in that organization or brand or leader. But exceptionally, if they go wrong, when we try to address that problem, when we try to solve that problem, the individuals come to the fore. That is, the people behind these organizations will shine when they are addressing these problems. That's what I have observed. For example, in Indigo Airlines, they had managed to beat up a customer on the tarmac. There's a communication there. There's a brand that sacked everyone on email or on Twitter message, the Twitter itself, by the way. There's a communication there. There's a communication that one of the agents of government has indicated that the government is going to be very tough, very insensitive at the same time. Although he wanted to say that he's tough, but it became insensitive about certain stakeholders group in a large democratic country. How do these people come back and correct? So that's a very important aspect. Mistakes may happen because you are dealing with various stakeholder groups, and day in and day out this communication is happening, and not always it is integrated. But then when mistakes happen, how do we come back and correct? So that is something area which we want some light on and some tips from you as well.
There, like I mentioned, Sudhakar, there's a word called no. There's also a word called sorry. And I think if you want to be a good communicator and a good leader, you should hang up your ego. They call it servant leadership. I don't really like the term, but hang up your ego in the morning and pick it up at night if you need to. And I've always believed that whenever I have made a mistake, and believe me, everyone, we're all human, we do make mistakes. It's always better to say sorry. And even if, say, my team has made a mistake, I've always taken the beating, right? And the buck stopped always with me. And I said, I'm sorry, this mistake has happened, and I apologize. And they yelled, and I would listen. And one of the ways to mitigate anger is to just keep quiet and let it just slide down. Let the other person run out of steam. But saying sorry and accepting that you made a mistake is critical. The moment you do that, the whole situation diffuses. The moment you get confrontational about something, right? You sort of start banging heads. Now, legally, sometimes you cannot admit to fault because you can be sued, especially in the US. You need to word it properly, but you can still say sorry legally correctly. You know what I mean? But the word sorry, I think, is as important in communication as the word no. Now, coming to the frontline staff, a lot of them, poor things, and Indigo is I travel a lot. I travel every week. One of the problems with frontline service staff is they're not being trained correctly. Their supervisors don't have what it takes to train those poor people. So that old Gurukul that we used to follow when we grew up in corporate life, we had a Gurukul. So you had a strong boss who was able to train you. In today's world, I don't think the boss knows enough to train you anyway. I call this the complete breakdown of corporate culture. Our corporate Gurukuls are broken. So how does that poor front-facing stewardess or ground staff, who's taught him how to handle a situation like this? And if it's an ugly situation, and it's bound to be in a service industry, they've not been taught how to handle a crisis. So what do? They just don't know what to do. It's not a question of not wanting to do. They don't know what to do. And our entire corporate hierarchies have become they don't know what to do either. The boss and the boss's boss don't know what to do either. So where does this young person learn from? And I think that is the bigger problem. I think that is the crux of this whole problem about wrong communication. And the fact that you're trained not to say sorry, not to take the blame for anything. That's also part of our education system. We're not trained to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, right? We're always justifying mistakes. Sorry, I'm getting a little philosophical here, but being an educator in my other avatar, I'm thinking that this complete breakdown of the corporate Gurukul is doing so much disservice to the service level people, the front-facing staff.
No, thank you, ma'am. I think you have shared wonderful answers there. One in terms of the power of saying sorry, and the other one is the power of training at all levels, especially in consumer-facing businesses. In fact, it's true to all the businesses, but more importantly, the front-ending employees and front-ending professionals who need to be trained on certain critical aspects like this. Only when things go wrong, we try and look at the manuals. But I think it should be proactively engaged with training, and then probably we would have gone to handling
just to give you a very trivial example, those announcements that the stewardesses make when the flights take off. I bet you that nobody understands what they're saying. They don't know what they're saying either. It just takes a minute to train them, and my hands itch every time I fly. I want to stand up and teach those girls how to actually speak. It's just a question of intonation. Nobody's taught them to do that.
Thank you, ma'am. So I'll ask one more question before we open the mic. That is, you have mentored many women entrepreneurs, not just as part of the NS Raghavan cell, but even otherwise also. What are some of the challenges that women face? What unique communication challenges that they might face in leadership roles? And also, what advice do you give women who, it is believed that they struggle with self-advocacy and visibility in leadership? These are the 2 points of one question.
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, I've grown up in a generation where we had no me too, he too, she too. There were no concessions given to women. We had to be the best we were for the job, right? So that's how we got on. And that's something I want the young women of today and all the women in this audience to understand. You need to be the best there is, right? And knowledge is actually power. And that's one thing that I have strongly believed in. I've always known more than anybody else, man or woman, in a setting. And that's how I have been able to, grow as I have. Now, women naturally, a lot of them are not trained to communicate. Okay. And they feel shy. And something, Sudhakar, I'm beginning to realize a lot of men are equally shy. So it's not just the women. Men are equally shy. And one of the things you need to learn is to communicate. So I tell people, both men and women, stop being Barbie dolls and Ken dolls. Learn how to communicate. You don't need to be an alpha personality to be heard, but you need to be knowledgeable. You need to be a subject matter expert. The moment you have that expertise and knowledge, people listen to you and your gender becomes completely irrelevant. And we're always worrying about what I have been trying to search. They will think. Who cares what they think? We're always, we're conditioned culturally to bother about what they will think, what will they say. Who cares? As long as you know what you're doing and you are clear about what you're saying, how do they matter?
Wonderful, ma'am. I think the takeaway is build your expertise, have the appetite for knowledge, become subject matter expert, and then other things will actually go into the backside.
Absolutely.
So I think these are very, very important, practical, actionable takeaways for anyone, not just women. But the question was about women. But it answered more than what I've asked for. Thank you very much, ma'am. I'll request Sujata Garu to ask a question. Sujata Garu, please speak.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much. Interesting conversations and presentations. I really enjoyed it. I'm a postgraduate in chemistry. I taught in India for over 15 years. I moved to the UK. As you said, there's a lot of difference between the communication that we communicate in the UK, in India and in the UK. So I run a charity now, coming back to the what question I wanted to ask. I run a charity that's a mentoring charity. And most of it really reflected to me what you said about communication and how you train, or how you help anybody, vulnerable people. I have got a young person, very good with the work, that I was referred by a corporate sector, that she is very apprehensive of giving presentations or public speaking. She's very confident, she's got the knowledge, she's got everything, but I don't know why she's very, very scared of giving presentations. Certain things I know, I've learned a lot from you, but how do I do that? Would you be able to answer that, please?
So, Sujata, what I would recommend at the initial stages, and I used to do this regularly with my team, was to go with them for the presentation, allow them to present, right? Make them practice with me before and make them present, and tell them that I was always there if they got stuck, but I wanted them to present. So the first couple of times it wasn't the best, but I noticed that when I did this on a regular basis, they got they built their self-confidence. And slowly, they didn't need me anymore. So you will need to do a little bit of hand-holding. Don't dump her in the drink, right? You need to be with her until she's got her confidence. And you need to tell her that it's fine if she fails. See, the problem is, I think everywhere in the world, we celebrate success. We never celebrate failure. And if you don't fail, you're never going to learn. So I remember the first time I presented at IIM Bangalore, about 5 years after my graduation. It was horrendous. I couldn't show my face there for the next 3 years because I was so ashamed of my presentation. I read from a paper. And then I told myself this is not happening. I picked myself up and I started presenting. And now according to my son, I talk too much, but that's another matter. So Sujata, you will have to do a little hand-holding. Go with her for the presentation. Don't leave it completely to her, and slowly build her confidence. Now, if at the end of this exercise, give yourself some time. So if she doesn't pick it up, say in 3 months, give her a 3 or say 4 month period. Doesn't pick it up, then there is an inherent problem. use her for the back end and get another face to make the presentation. That would be my advice.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, maybe she should practice because here the corporate sectors don't allow us to go with them. So probably I should practice with her in the
Yeah.
office and then
Absolutely.
record it. There's a technology, she should be able to record it and then look at herself and then improve.
Of course.
Thank you.
But you need to tell her it's okay not to be the best presenter.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sudhakar.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam.
Ma'am, one derivative question, which is potentially commercial in nature. And that question is, what are the top 3 things that you can help us with so that we can ace TEDx talks?
Okay. All right. The first thing with the TEDx talk is the subject or the topic that you're going to speak about must come from your heart, right? So some of the new TEDx talks I'm seeing, the topic is kind of superimposed on you and it's a force fit. So do not accept a talk, and this is something I'm very particular about, unless it appeals, unless you can, you feel it. You need to feel that talk, any talk for that matter. That's one. The second thing is practice, and that's something I like about TEDx. They're very, very clear about the process, and they actually make you practice. And when you see yourself sometimes on the big screen, you realize, even a seasoned presenter realizes how many mistakes you can make. The other thing is timing. And this is something, Sudhakar, not just for TEDx, but for everybody. About 6 to 7 minutes. I mean, I know my talk was longer, but this is an educational talk. 6 to 7 minutes for a talk like TEDx is more than enough, right? Because most of us can't carry it on for longer without slides and things, unless you're a really good speaker. Okay, so 6 to 7 minutes, because the attention spans are becoming shorter. So the timing, the way you present, and it is a little intimidating. You have to stand in that red circle and you can't move around. But I think basically that subject that you're speaking about has to come from your heart. I think that's the crux of it.
Wonderful, ma'am. Wonderful. I think we need to feel the topic or the subject and then practice a lot and then time it carefully. I think you suggested that 6 to 7 minutes is the ideal, but anything beyond 6 to 7 minutes is also difficult for a speaker to actually get to.
Unless you're very good.
Unless you're very good.
Very
so that
good.
brings me to another question, ma'am. What are the lessons that we can draw from the styles of Barack Obama, who is a leader at one end, and another equally good, Shashi Tharoor? Are there any lessons that we can draw from these 2 leaders?
Oh, lots. I keep quoting them. Barack Obama is a good speaker, but I don't think there's a soul. I didn't find the soul. Initially, when he was campaigning, he had something in him, He was, there was something about him, a power about him. And I think that was why he got elected the first time. But later what happened is, I think with all the teleprompters and Washington happening, he became very Washington and correct. So I think he lost the spark, right? And that was, if you look at his second tenure, he kind of lost that spark. He was very fluent, all of that, but it didn't come from his heart anymore. It was very practiced and, robotic. Shashi Tharoor is a very interesting character. I also use some of his speeches in my teaching. The guy is completely brilliant. And I follow him around sometimes with a dictionary just to figure out whether he makes a mistake. In any of the words, he uses large words, right? He never makes a mistake. The usage of the word is absolutely perfect. And I've come to the conclusion that he and my late mother actually have their handle of the English language. My mother used to speak just like Shashi Tharoor. That's an old way of speaking. So language-wise, he's perfect. It also doesn't help. He also looks good. He's great eye candy. So he's good to look at. But Shashi is not a presenter, which is what you need to be when you're a leader of an organization. He's an orator. And the other thing with Shashi Tharoor is you have to be part of an intellectual diaspora which has done enough reading to understand his references. His references are fairly esoteric. So you need to be able to have read the things he keeps referring to understand what he's saying. And I get very mixed reactions. I play the speech of his and I ask for reactions from my class. I get very mixed reactions. Some of them love him and some of them say no. because they're not able to get the context. So he's a very intelligent, he speaks for the intelligence. He's not for everybody. He's not a Janata speaker, right? So that's something you must be very clear about, the way you speak and whether you're a presenter or an orator.
Wow. That's a clinical assessment of two of the most
Yeah.
popular leaders. So the difference between a presenter and an orator. So he is not a presenter but an orator in terms of Shashi Tharoor. And over a period of time, Barack Obama lost soul in what he's speaking. Although
Absolutely.
initially he connected with lots of people across
Very well. Yeah.
various geographies.
That also happens with a lot of these motivational speakers, Sudhakar. They find a formula, and then after a while it becomes formula ridden. What they say is part of a formula. And that's very sad because they actually have a lot to say, but they know what succeeds and they stick with that.
Oh, great. Yeah, I think, ma'am, without making it boring, without making it formula oriented, as the leader grows, I think the leader himself or herself will have to invent a methodology to look very unique every time he or she appears in front of public or in front of an organization that one belongs to. But I think it will not come from outside. It will have to come from inside. I think that's a very, very important takeaway again, as you mentioned. What we do is we'll now we'll request Professor Prasad to come back so that he will have a fantastic weekend, which is a fulfilled weekend by asking all the questions.
There is just one question. We run an online MBA and many of them are working executives. Obviously, there's a lot of work pressure and they do the program along with that. And these are, across the board kind of learners. Encouraging them to communicate better, which is the theme of this session, is a necessity. Now, if you come from the heart and you need to hit their emotions so that you encourage them to do that more, given the volume of what they need to do in terms of the curriculum and the, the deliverables, what would you suggest as an approach in communication to encourage them through their heart, do more on communication?
I teach a lot of MBA, EMBAs, right, online. And ever since COVID, I've been doing a lot of online programs. I have learned one thing. One is people hate to put their cameras on, which is a disadvantage when you're at the other end. But the way I have used online, and I'm fairly effective with that, is to make it very interactive. So I just keep cold calling and asking questions. So it's a little irritating, but I keep that time available where I get people to respond. The other thing I use chat regularly, and some people are shy about speaking, and possibly they can't put on their cameras because they're not in the right scenario, right ambience. So then I encourage them to use chat, and I pick up the chat every 3 to 4 minutes and I answer the questions. So I keep it interactive, and I also ask other people to comment. So I try and build these conversations in the class. And I noticed that after first a couple of sessions where they're quiet, I notice I get a huge amount of class participation. In fact, I have the other problem. I have to control the class participation. In live classes, which I also do a lot of, it's a little easier, but I am making all my classes very experiential. So I get people to come and write on the board, to present. I just give a little piece of theory and then I make them talk about it. And I think that's working well. I ask them to do, secondary research in class and then present what they do. So it is tough, Dr. Prasad, very tough, but you have to be at it. Cold calling works for me, and chat.
Thank you, ma'am. I take that as good suggestions for the synchronous element. Now for the asynchronous element, since we know that they are students and we are mentors to them, would you have any suggestions?
Which is, you're saying, within the classroom or
outside the classroom, outside the classroom. Meaning they're still distant. They are not available, but what mechanisms can we use to lighten up the fire?
Correct. So what I try and do is have a lot of little caselets and caselings, and I ask them to talk about their personal experiences, right? And I give them these frameworks, etc., and then I ask them to apply it and then come back. And I also do a lot of Zoom sessions, one-to-one or in groups, and that kind of works very well. So I take that little extra time. It takes a little extra time, but I donate my time to do that.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the valuable suggestions.
Great. There is one hand that has gone up just now. That is Dr. Akbar Khan. Over to you, Dr. Akbar Khan. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. Congratulations on 181th session. I hope that it would reach beyond 200 and odd and go more, reaching the target of 1,000. I wish you all the best for this.
Thank you, and the credit
No,
goes to you
because
as well.
the question which I have has been generated in the world out of the question that you posed with regard to Shashi Tharoor. Now, the thing is actually, this question is meant for ma'am actually. The leaders like Swami Vivekananda, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa on spiritual side, spiritual leaders, let us call them as, and then Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, these people on the political side actually, they impacted the minds of people positively, of course, revolutionizing both the spiritual world as well as the political world. Now let us take up the next category of speakers like Hitler, Benito Mussolini, and Stalin. They also impacted the minds of people in their own way. Now, how do we rate or differentiate their communication in terms of leading or misleading, rather, I must say? Though all of them were leaders in their own right. They were impactful in their own way.
Yeah.
So, how should we rate them? Because they were good at their communication, actually. They knew the pulse of the people at that time.
So
But-
they were very good communicators. You're absolutely right. All of them had got the principles of communication. So my WIIFM, RTB, all that was taken care of. But what I want you to remember, Dr. Khan, is you need to look at them in context, right? So they were very effective at that point in time. I'm not very sure whether they would be effective in today's age. So at that stage of their, when they were orators and leaders, they were very effective because the context was suitable. Are they going to be as suitable today? I'm not very sure because the distractions today are much, much more. And people are getting so used to video as a format that listening to speeches are becoming very tiresome. Most people don't listen anymore. They want short podcasts or whatever. So listening as an art has gone down. So I'm not sure when kind of oratory, over long periods of time would be so effective in today's attention deficit generation. The other thing that bothers me is you can use this for spewing a lot of hate as well, right? And it depends on how you can work people up into a frenzy like Hitler did. But he tapped into, and this is something which is probably something you're not going to agree with me. He tapped into a very strong consumer insight or human insecurity, which the Germanic people were having at that point against the Jews. And that is perhaps why his rhetoric was so powerful and so impactful. So it's very contextual, it's very time-bound, and you have to hit the right nerve, as they say.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your views on these leaders, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. That was a very, very powerful question as well. Thank you, Dr. Abdul Khan. I'll request Dr. Sanjay Kumar Yadav to speak.
Sir, good evening, ma'am. Good evening. Actually, we are discussing about the language and communication. Silent communication. I want to just understand about the silent communication because we are also discussing about the brand. Brand just communicate silently. They try to differentiate from one brand to another brand silently. So, ma'am, can you enlighten on these things?
Okay. So in the human context, it's body language. All right. So the silent communication that you're talking about, Dr. Yadav, is the body language. In the brand, because I'm also a brand specialist, in the brand context, it is the logo, the symbols, the color, the kind of words they use, right? The visuals. So that becomes what is called their silent language. So body language for humans and all the external logos, symbols, colors, music, all of that builds a silent communication for brands. So sometimes you just need to hear the sound. Right? For example, Titan has what is called a MOGO, a musical logo. You just need to hear that. You don't really need to see the ad, which is why people are investing so much in music, right? So that is what I call the silent communication of brands.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. I have one question before we close, and that question is in this world of social media and the fascination for chat GPT and DeepSeek, so on and so forth. What are the tips, what are suggestions that you give for the leaders of this era? I think we've spoken about leaders from 200 years ago, leaders from 20 years ago, 10 years ago as well. But I think we need to also talk about the leaders 10 years from now, at least, if not far. What suggestions you would have for us in this overuse, abuse of intervening social media excesses that we have?
Sudhakar, I don't think social media is going anywhere. I think it's not going away, nor is technology. And now with newer and newer models coming in, deep reach, all of them, I don't think we shouldn't be ostriches in the sand, and bury our heads in the sand. Cannot be anymore. As leaders, we need to accept that these tools are going to be used, whether we like it or not, whether officially or unofficially, and harness it for our benefit, right? So one of the things, and I was debating a curriculum for a communication program just this morning, coincidentally, and I realized that written communication as we know it, writing memos, letters, etc., is no longer relevant because you just put it through an AI editor and you get what you need, okay? And then you can humanize it. So I think written communication is definitely going to be impacted. Oral communication, perhaps not so much because it needs a human being unless you can have an AI avatar. So I think oral communication is going to be very important. And that's something that no robot can take away. It can possibly help you with formatting the presentation. But having said that, and this is what I tell all my students, certainly use the tech, but humanize it and make it you, make it authentic, right? So use the structure that AI can give you, and it does give you a great structure. I fool around with all the AI tools. It gives you a great structure, but what it doesn't give you is the humanity. And that's what you need to bring to the table. Because sometimes the way AI gives you stuff, it sounds like Shashi Tharoor or my mother. It sounds very mechanistic and old-fashioned. You need to bring it to today's age. And of course, you can train the AI to suit you. So use the structure, but humanize. And as leaders, we need to understand this. Social media is also not going anywhere. So you need to be very clear that you use it to your benefit in moderation. You don't let it get away with it.
Brilliant, ma'am. Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think we need to use all the emerging tools, but humanize the tech that's available at your hand, at your disposal, and
make it
try.
you, personalize it.
Yeah, yes, universalize it. And also, oral communication is something which we have to step up and use the structures and principles. Principles will remain the same. Structures are required as aids, and then we connect to our audiences, which keep changing. But once we do that, once we put our soul into our communication, I'm sure we emerge as successful leaders. Wonderful, ma'am. You also said that like no size fits all. One size doesn't fit all. Similarly, no single style actually helps all. Examples that you have shared from political leaders, leaders of countries, leaders of organizations as well. I think context is extremely important. Situations are extremely important. And the audience, every time your own audience will be expecting something different in a different context. And if you have that pulse on the audience, I'm sure you will tailor it accordingly. And all the frameworks that you have mentioned will take us there to make us a successful communicator. And we also have to not get confused between being a presenter and being a narrator with the examples that you have given. And more importantly, when we close, ma'am, I think with these takeaways, with these acronyms that you have helped us to do that, I think it is easy to practice. There's a lot of actionable stuff that you have given. We can jot down, work on these things, and try and test it out in different situations in our own context, in our own organizations. Small groups, bigger groups. I think it is for a practitioner that these tips are going to be extremely useful. And the summary that I take away, biggest summary that I take away is that more often than not, most of the successful leaders have been very good communicators.
Absolutely.
That's really, it is not just about speaking, but communicating in all forms. Like, in our own small units, we see mothers as leaders at homes. They communicate extremely well, extremely effectively, not always in terms of the canes or the chapels, but not always in terms of the speaking. But I think they they succeed in communicating effectively, and the child or the members in the family understand it so well. I think they
Communicating
put
with
their,
substance, Sudhakar.
yeah, this
We
is
need to
substance.
communicate. There has to be substance, otherwise it becomes very shallow. And especially in today's social media world, the shallowness of the communication is actually beginning to bother me. It is so
Exactly.
shallow.
Exactly.
Nothing solid under it.
I think some good leaders will quickly spot what is being machine generated and what is human generated very easily. It is too good, too well-rounded, and lacks that soul which you were talking about some time back. I think we need to, as you said, put our soul, involve in that, and then make it as human as possible, and then we will succeed. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your time, your energy, and your expertise in helping all of us understand whether we really communicate like a leader, or what are the things that we need to pick up and learn and become a good leader or a successful leader. Thanks for this time this evening on Friday.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for being a nice audience. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was session number 181. We'll come back on Friday on February 7th with yet another leader. This time the leader is Dr. J. Chowdhury. He's a techie, he's an angel investor, and many things. We will try and understand what that world looks at and what are the lessons that we have for us. Before we close, Google Malavika Harita. You will have lots of things that you can learn from by reading some of our talks, articles, and many more things that you can actually pick up and use. And also, whatever you have jotted down today will itself be a very concise and ready to action kind of a document for all of us. But we will give a summary at the end of this talk. We'll share a summary on our website as well, of course, after approval from ma'am, and also a video which we will upload on our website. Go back in case you have missed, or those friends who have missed, tell them to go back and learn from this conversation as well.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am. And ladies and gentlemen, have a great weekend and good night.